Hi there, and welcome to the Skylight Books author reading series. If you'd like to learn more about us and our many upcoming author events, please visit skylightbooks.com, where you can browse our inventory, buy books, and join our Friends with Benefits Club. You can also follow us on Twitter, Tumblr, and Facebook. To speak to a real live bookseller like me, please call 323-660-1175. Thanks for your support, and enjoy.
Emma Copley Eisenberg her work has appeared in Granta, McSweeney's, VQR, Tin House, and the New Republic, among other outlets, and has been recognized by the Malay Colony, the Helene Wurlitzer Foundation, the Elizabeth George Foundation, Lambda Literary, and Longread's Best Crime Reporting. She lives in Philadelphia, where she directs Blue Stoop, a hub for literary arts. She'll be reading for about 10-15 minutes, and then she'll be joined by Steph Cha. Steph is the author of the Juniper Song Crime Trilogy. She's an editor and critic whose work has appeared in the LA Times, USA Today, and the LA Review of Books. A native of the San Fernando Valley, she lives in LA with her husband and 2 basset hounds. At this time, please welcome Emma.
Wow, so many friends. Thank you. Cool, thanks. Thanks for coming on this Wednesday. It's really nice to see you all. Thank you to Skylight for having me. Thank you so much to Steph for being in conversation even when sick. Steph's book is amazing. You should read it. It's an amazing and complicated story of race and violence that's ever more relevant today, I feel, even though I believe it's based in a period in Los Angeles' history several decades ago. I'm going to read to you a little bit from The Third Rainbow Girl, which is a little bit of a strange book in the sense that it has 3 components. It's a story of these crimes that happened in 1980 in West Virginia. Basically, there was this rainbow festival. I don't know if folks are familiar with the rainbows. People are nodding. It still exists today, but it was really more like sort of maybe like a Burning Man at the time in like the late 70s, like a thing that you would go and do with your friends, like an adventure, but didn't necessarily like define your way of life. They're a sort of back to nature, very loosely organized group of folks who gather in national public lands. So they were having a gathering in this very rural part of West Virginia. People came, like 20,000 people came from elsewhere. These 2 women ended up dead, and the ways that this events in the investigation around the crime really can teach us bigger things about what this place is, and also about the ways that this place's history interacts with what we think currently about Appalachia and West Virginia more broadly. And then the last part of the book, or sort of thread, is that I came to this part of West Virginia when I was young, after school, as a AmeriCorps Vista, so someone that was technically there to serve against, to ameliorate poverty was like the official idea of it. And my sort of ambivalence and questioning of what it means to be an outsider, be someone that's there supposedly for this helping purpose, and then also the ways that my own experiences in this place began to like rhyme and resonate with the other 2 strands of the book. So I just got to chat last night with Vanessa Veselka, who's this amazing writer in Portland who wrote a piece that was really helpful for me in thinking about conceptualizing, like, how do you write about women who are traveling and who die as a result of those travels without sort of pathologizing them or making them seem like victims. And she really inspired me to read some of the hitchhiking sections. So I'm going to read you a little bit about this kind of trio road trip that these women took. There's a little bit of death, and then there's a little bit of road trip. So be prepared. Okay. By the morning after the murders, Thursday, June 26th, 1980, the news covered the southern part of Pocahontas County like a fog and then moved north towards Marlinton. Wives called their husbands at work. Children turned to face their classmates at the school bus and then told their parents over dinner what they'd learned. in the restaurant of the Marlinton Motor Inn, at Miss Kitty's beer joint, at Dory's lunch counter, in the front yard of Oak Grove Presbyterian Church in Hillsborough, the story spread. 2 girls had been found on Briary Knob, shot to death, 19 and 26, so young. A fear that gripped the throat and stomach. Some parents wanted to keep their children home from school. Outside the marathon station in Hillsborough was an ice machine and a bench for shooting the shit, usually occupied by retirees and older men drinking coffee from styrofoam cups. By the gas pumps, a volunteer ambulance driver for the Hillsborough Fire Department was holding forth for a small crowd. "I had a hell of an ambulance call last night," he said. He had been the one to drive the dead women's bodies from Briary Knob to the hospital in Marlinton. Someone asked if the women were local, and the ambulance driver said no, but the rumor was the people who did the killings were. Those gathered agreed. No one not from Pocahontas County would know how to get to Briary. June 25th was a Wednesday, and the Pocahontas Times went to press Wednesday nights, so the news of the young man's discovery in the woods didn't hit kitchen tables until a full week later. Tragedy struck Pocahontas County with the finding last Wednesday night of the bodies of 2 young women on the Briary Knob Road, the Times reported. In an effort to identify them, the paper ran 2 thumb-sized photos of the corpses. For days after Nancy's sister identified the bodies, sheriff's deputies in West Virginia and Iowa searched for the elusive Liz. Authorities in every American state were sent her description. "It seems now that a 3rd girl may be involved," reported the editor of the Pocahontas Times. "She is believed to be a tall, slender blonde named Elizabeth." The area around Briary Knob was checked and rechecked for this, quote, 3rd rainbow girl. A week later, the investigator's phone rang at the state police headquarters. "My name is Elizabeth Jondro," the voice said, "and I'm alive." Liz met Vicki Durian at the Co-op grocery store in Tucson, just as Nancy had. So there's 3 women on this who become important. 2 of them, Vicki and Nancy, do end up dying, but they're all sort of friends. They become friends together, hitchhike across the country, and then, as you will see, make different choices. Liz was hanging outside the store with her backpack when Vicki tore off a hunk of the crusty bread she'd bought and handed it to her. Liz had hopped out of a van headed west earlier that day and didn't know anyone in town. Vicki had put down some roots and had a mentor's warm energy. They walked the 3 blocks to Vicki's apartment, which she shared with 2 other women. She'd been to Tucson about 6 months and worked as a nurse in the homes of elderly people in the area to pay the bills. There were already a few people camping in tents in her backyard and another couple living out of a truck that was parked in the front. All Vicki had left to offer Liz was a closet. Would that work? It was a big closet. When Vicki wasn't working, she and Liz walked all over Tucson. Vicki knew the restaurants, supermarkets, bakeries, and produce suppliers that threw away perfectly good food, so they dumpster dived and prepared what they found in big dinners for whoever happened to be staying at Vicki's that night. They sat on the steps of Vicki's home with the other travelers and talked. Someone knew beadwork, and from then on, that's what they did with their hands. Vicki took Liz to parties at the sprawling communal house where Nancy had stayed, but Liz and Nancy didn't meet each other. The house was a real hippie household. They juiced everything, drank wheatgrass, kept a kombucha mother in the fridge, which did not surprise Liz. Almost nothing surprised Liz then. She was 18, but she felt much older, felt that she had seen it all, done it all, drugged it all. So when, a few months after arriving in Tucson, Liz heard about a hippie outlaw commune in the desert, she figured it was as good time as any to head there. Its residents were several families from Arkansas who had been caught growing pot by the kilo, and others who were hiding out from the law. Some of them had been to last year's rainbow gathering. "Go," they told Liz. She had saved some money, but it was stolen at the commune. She went anyway. Liz was in a school bus on her way to Washington State, another adventure, but then Mount St. Helens erupted, covering the entire Pacific Northwest, from Idaho to Alberta in ash. She caught a ride out of Portland and arrived in Iowa a few days after Vicki and Nancy. Liz could calculate the miles they needed to cover and about how long it should take them to get there, but it was Vicki who would lean over and make people stop, and Vicki who would talk to them about who they were and where they were headed, while Nancy hung back on the road's shoulder. There was the woman who drove past them because she was too scared to pick up 3 hitchhikers, and then turned back because she felt she should. They were women. They got a ride in an RV from another woman who told them, "Send me a postcard when you get where you're going." A truck driver let them off at a truck stop in Illinois and told them about a baseball field nearby where they could get a safe night's sleep. There was a Christian guy who took them home to his family for dinner. They had a gun pulled on them. The guy told them he just wanted them to know he had it. Then he put the gun away and drove on. In Louisville, they were riding in a semi-truck with a bench seat, and the driver started grabbing at Vicki, who was sitting next to him. When they stopped at a traffic light, Vicki grabbed his deodorant can and sprayed him in the face with it, and the trio hopped out and ran. Vicki taught Liz how to juggle. They had a tent, but never used it. That's how clear the sky was. Vicki had brought a small drum in a velvet case, and she played it if she couldn't sleep. The three friends reached Charleston, West Virginia, ahead of schedule. Vicki wanted to go to the beach, said they had time, and Liz and Nancy agreed. A guy picked them up and drove them to a big old mansion on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina. He had homebrew, he made his own furniture, and the women talked with him a while, swam with him off the coast, and spent the night in his rambling home. They'd intended to spend another night camping on the beach, but it rained. They left the next day, catching a ride in an empty Trailways bus up into North Carolina, and planned to make it to the gathering the following day. But that night, Liz had a feeling she should call home, and acted on it. Her father was getting remarried in Vermont that week. She decided to part ways with Vicki and Nancy. At a truck stop in Richmond, Virginia, the three women said their goodbyes. Liz stood on a road headed north. Vicki and Nancy stood across from her so they could catch a ride headed west towards the gathering. A truck stopped and picked her up, Liz told the investigator, and she didn't know what had happened to her friends after that. So that's the first part, which gives you a little sense of what the case is, and also it was really important to me to make the women who died like human people who had interesting and complicated lives and reasons for going on this adventure in the first place. And then I'm going to read you a little bit that's one fun thing about writing a book like this that has so much history. I did a lot of research. I got to go down some really fun sort of wormholes of knowledge and questioning, read a lot of theory and psychology and sociology and all the things, and I tried to put that into the machine, crank, and then out comes hopefully a better narrative and what I've learned for you all. So this is a section, this idea of belief, why does one person believe a story or a theory of a crime and another person doesn't, becomes really important in the book. So I did a lot of thinking and researching about what is belief, why do some people believe and some others don't. So this is just a small section that speaks to that. The precise process we are talking about when we say believe and where we think it happens, the brain, the heart, the stomach, are poorly understood. So there's this investigator named Debbie DeFalco who comes in later, and you don't have to know too much about her, except for she doesn't believe the dominant theory that other people believe about the crime, which is that it was done by a local person. So that's who she is. Debbie DeFalco believed this other theory that the killer had not been local, while the investigators from Pocahontas County did not. We tend to treat believability as if it were synonymous with truthfulness or akin to solving a mathematical equation, but the relationship between what is believable and what is true, and further, what makes a story believable to one listener but not to another, turn out to be some of the murkiest parts of human cognition. The 12 jurors who voted to convict the local farmer. There also is no such thing as spoilers in this book because I give you all of the information up front, much to the chagrin of many ladies on Goodreads. But that is true because the book is much more about why and what does it mean than what, So the 12 jurors who voted to convict the local farmer were given the following instructions. After making your assessment concerning the credibility of a witness, you may decide to believe all of that witness's testimony, only a portion of it, or none at all. In making your assessment, you should carefully scrutinize all of the testimony given, the circumstances under which each witness has testified, and every matter and evidence which tends to show whether a witness, in your opinion, is or is not worthy of belief. The instructions also ask them to consider, when determining believability, each witness's intelligence, motive to falsify, state of mind, and appearance and manner while on the witness stand. Yet much of this, for example, every matter in evidence, or a witness's appearance and manner, leave great room for subjectivity. The judge several times directed the jury to use, quote, common sense and to view the evidence, quote, in light of your own observations and experience of the ordinary affairs of life, as if this would manifest 12 identical compasses. For centuries, we believed that humans are generally rational beings, applying rational thought and usually achieving sound judgment, except under circumstances where our feelings get in the way. But in the 1980s, just after Vicki and Nancy were killed, a sea change began to sweep through the scholarly community. What if it wasn't that our feelings were the source of our errors in logic, experts began to ask, but rather that our, quote, machinery of cognition contained errors in its very design? Scholars who studied the processes of mind relevant to civil and criminal trial proceedings took up this idea with gusto. Researchers Nancy Pennington and Reed Hasty at the University of Colorado applied it to studying the workings of the mind of judges and juries and published a series of studies in the late 1980s and early 1990s that advanced a theory called the story model. Their theory holds that cognitively, instead of taking in each piece of information one at a time and judging it on its logical merits, humans tend to judge legal evidence en masse, forming a story out of it. We then match the story we have built to the relevant legal term, guilty or not, murder in the first degree or second degree, and so forth. Researchers found that the stories that judges and jury members construct influence their assessments of how credible a given witness is or the importance of a given piece of evidence. They also found that we tend to fill in any gaps in evidence with inferred causes and associations consistent with the story we've built, and omit pieces of information that are unrelated or contradictory to our own story. That is, if you've already started to tell yourself that the defendant is a good guy, wrongly accused of murder, you will be more likely to disbelieve the ex-wife who takes the stand to testify to his violent temper and find reasons to discount the bloody footprint that matches his shoe, etc. The justice process is a war between competing stories and a quest to win the imagination of the people who matter at every stage: investigators, prosecutors, judges, and juries. But what factors determine why these people choose one story or another? Most experts in the field have come to the consensus that is the ease of story construction. That is, the easier it is for the parties that matter to form a story out of the events in the first place, the more likely they are to believe that story. According to the story model, two characteristics determine how believable an average person will find a story: coverage, or the extent to which the story accounts for evidence, and coherence, or the story's wholeness, lack of contradictions, and plausibility. Essentially, the more familiar the story is then, the easier the narrative connection forged between teller and listener. At its most basic, many experts say, our brains work by slotting our experiences into molds of classic stories. Each time we hear a new story, we figure out what it means by trying to match it to one of our stored narratives. We are always looking for the closest possible matches, write Roger Schenck and Robert Abelson, professors at Northwestern and Yale. We are looking to say, in effect, well, something like that happened to me too, or I had an idea about something like that myself. So I think I'll stop there, and hopefully when we get into talking more about it, we'll get a sense of why it's so important to think about the ways that we construct stories, because that has relevance both to the woman who died and also to the place itself. So I'm going to invite up Steph Cha. Thank you. And for doing this while you were sick, yes.
I was like, ooh, how bad would it be to back out? It would be really bad.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I really enjoyed that reading, and I like that we kind of get into a couple of the different strands of the book, because I wanted to ask about that, because I think this is like an interesting book structurally, because it does weave together kind of different genres. I mean, it's true crime, it's true crime and memoir, which which some
It's a thing,
yeah, it is a thing, but it's also, as you pointed out, it doesn't follow some of the conventions of true crime, and it doesn't follow all the conventions of memoir either. And so it's kind of this unique object that is very well reported and very personal. And I was curious about how you went into the construction of this book and balancing those threads.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of changing my mind, a lot of annoying my editor. But yes, essentially, I think I first thought I was writing two separate projects. Like, I thought I was writing a reported story about these events that I knew had been really influential and difficult and had like spawned all of this trauma in this community that I cared about and had lived, but I was like, let's keep those separate. But I did also have this sort of gnawing feeling of like, what I did in this place as, again, like an employee of the American government, quote unquote poverty worker, like that had some ambivalent connection to the place I was in. And also I was sort of, supposedly there to work with young women, but I felt actually all around me like the struggle to live and survive as a young man was extremely like pressing in this area as well. And I just felt like all those contradictions were kind of like pushing at me in a personal way as well, of just like, yes, the questions of like, who am I and what did I do and was I good or was I bad, and were these people that meant a great deal to me, like, was I harmed? Did I do harm by being there as someone that's, quote, there to alleviate poverty? All these questions. And I felt like at some point I realized that writing the narrative just of the crimes, like just doing the reporting and the research, wasn't going to speak to like those deeper questions that I really wanted to know the answers to, which had to do with like, what is it about this place that allowed like these events to cut so deeply into people, and what is it about these like particular structure of these crimes that made people so bonkers. Like, there's just so many people who confessed, there's so many people who recanted, so many people who changed their testimony, who accused loved ones or friends of these crimes, and there was not enough in the just straight reporting that I felt could explain those emotional rifts, and so I felt I needed to bring in some other element, and the balance we struck was there's 7 parts, 5 of them are reported, 2 of them are first person about my time there, and I also wanted to make sure to bring in like a contemporary thread, because I think we also have this like idea of West Virginia or Appalachia is like lost by time, or like long, long ago there was a place called West Virginia, and I was like, no, like there, all of the interesting work and struggles and, art and music that people were making when I was there, I felt like that was relevant and in a way also to the portrait of this community. So that was the balance we struck. It's yes, again, like I think like the people who love true crime are like, this is not true crime and I'm mad about it, and the people that love memoir are like, there's too much murder. So like it's tricky. It's like a tricky balance, and I think that it's a book that I wish I could have read and encountered. So I hope that it exists for those who are interested in a sort of strange hybrid.
Well, and it's very creative, because I was having a hard time thinking of kind of an antecedent, and I'm not surprised that you had to weave together these 2 strands too, because one of the things that was striking to me about this book is how the kind of players that you the people that you just like hung out with, how so many of them just ended up being kind of tied into the story in some way. There's you ended up in like a writers group with the man who discovered the bodies. Yeah. And like in present day, your ex-boyfriend is working with one of the witnesses who wouldn't talk to you.
Correct. Yes. The one who truly got away. Yes.
Yeah. No. And so it was kind of, I mean, so like, how do you really separate that in this kind of like cold reported piece? Because these are people that you have a lot of affection for and that you have personal relationships with. And I think, and I thought that was one of the really fascinating things about this book, is kind of, you get the broad, here's this crime that happened in 1980. It is 1980, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You got it.
Yeah, so like it's the crime that happened 40 years ago, and then here are these people now who like are living with it in a very real way, and so I think it could be pretty hard to separate.
Yeah, indeed.
So I wanted to ask you about, and and I know you're very cognizant of this, and you touched on it, but like, as a writer from New York, and
Yeah.
who went in there in this capacity as, with VistaCorps, how you approached, because I think very early on, you kind of set up this, you kind of very rightly so talk about the way that Appalachia is misconceived by a lot of outside writers, and so I wanted to ask how you approached writing about this place, and what pitfalls you thought you were able to avoid in the kind of, I'm coming from elsewhere to write about this intimate environment, and what pitfalls you feel like are actually unavoidable, and if you can talk about that ambivalence.
Oh, for sure. Yes. Many a night has been spent with this question, in an important way. And I think that I try to talk in the book about like that there's this kind of pattern that happens with at least Central Appalachia, where we sort of as a broader culture in America like care about it because something goes wrong, or it's clear again how much broader America is connected to Appalachia, and people are like, what is this? What's happening here? We must understand it. And then we like forget about Appalachia for like 40 years and like people don't care again. And then it comes back around. And we're like living in this moment right now since like 2016 where we've like decided that Appalachia is like the cause of Trump, and like Trump is upon us because of Appalachia, which is like factually incorrect. Like they're, rich white people voted for Trump in far greater numbers than poor white people did. And like more people in the like suburbs of Philly where I live, like by a percentage voted for Trump than people like West Virginia would have gone for Bernie had he been the candidate, which is like a tough reality. Complicated.
It was also interesting, I guess West Virginia is a state that has consistently gone Democrat, even in like the landslide elections.
Yeah.
Like they're the only ones who they're one of the only states that went against Reagan.
Yeah,
right?
they voted to elect a caucus, and like just the way that it's like every election until 2000 basically, and then George W. Bush like really did start the slide towards a Republican like hold on West Virginia. But yeah, it's been a sort of like union strong, like working class democratic state for most of the 20th century. Yeah, so I think I definitely feel like I'm a part of, I started writing this book in 2013, but in the sense of that I sold it in 2017, it's come out in 2020. It's certainly a part of this, like I am complicit in this pattern of like being interested in Appalachia in this moment in a way that we have not been historically, and I think that that's a long historical trend that has to do with like it's much easier to forget about a place that is applying, so many resources, that has been so historically like disenfranchised and exploited. It's not pleasant to like commune with that reality all the time. So there's been a lot of tendency to just like forget and then rediscover and then forget. So I'm certainly a part of that like rediscovery, I suppose, as of 2016. I think that I'm very interested and really appreciate, there's a book coming out actually, maybe it's this month, Kathy Park Hung's book. I think it's this month. February 2020.
Minor Feelings?
Yes, it's called Minor Feelings, and I read it, and she had like the best articulation. I had been trying to like articulate where sort of my positionality fit in terms of this book, and I feel like she had such a wonderful way of putting it, which is that she said that when writing about an experience that's not your own, that she likes to think of it as a really productive way to do that is to write alongside an experience rather than writing into it or for it or eclipsing like the energy or the center of that discussion, but to be a part of the discussion, like sort of standing with those whose experiences are actually represented. And I thought that was a really helpful way of putting it. I don't know that like whether or not I've achieved that here is like a matter of like debate as it should be. I think that I certainly tried to acknowledge that like up front very transparently, and then that was like another reason why like, or as we have seen in like recent days with like American Dirt and all the things, like writing fiction comes with a different set of difficulties and pitfalls than writing nonfiction does, although so does nonfiction. But I did think of writing this book in some ways as fiction in the beginning. It started as a short story, and I just felt that my imagination could not supply the information that would make this work meaningful, because it's not my community ultimately. And so writing it as nonfiction felt much better, in the sense that like there's I think a more robust tradition in nonfiction of people being like, this is who I am, this is what I'm bringing to it. Like, as I try to read in this section about believability, like, we're all bringing so much to our understanding of how we tell a story or interpret a story. So I wanted it to be really clear that I'm writing alongside this experience rather than for it. But yeah, really complicated.
And so when you were living in West Virginia, that was what, like 10 years ago?
Yes, weird. Yeah, 2009 to 2011. Mm-hmm.
And have you kept in touch with like your community there? Like, I was curious about the extent to which you're still like involved.
Yeah, I did this thing where the organization in the book, it's called Mountain Views. It's a well, it's not really called that, but that's what it's called in the book. It is a very cool organization founded by women from Southern West Virginia, and they hold. It's a nonprofit year-round, and then the summer becomes a camp. So I did go back every summer for like a month between the years of like 2011 and even after I left, like 2011 to 2017. So I still had a pretty strong relationship with that organization, and that helped me like maintain good relationships with friends there and past coworkers and stuff. Everyone read everything in the book that's relevant to them. So there was a lot of pre-showing of drafts and negotiations and some requests around like places that people wanted different changes or questions or conversation. Like there was a lot of conversations that happened like before the book came out and in the lead up to the book, which were wonderful and difficult and
I can imagine.
like all the things. And I think that that in a lot of ways made the book coming out like feel a lot more like true and ease my state of mind a bit, because those conversations had been wrestled with, not always like to the complete satisfaction of everybody, but authentically, I think, a long time before.
Was anyone in the community kind of suspicious when you started saying that you were working on this book, and like, and how did that manifest, and how did you deal with that?
I think that I would say like the feelings about writing the book and the reactions to it from folks I'm close to there have been like mixed in the very truest sense of that, like run the gamut from feeling like not really sure why we need a book about these events that were already so difficult and already dragged on so long. I guess my hope was always to that point, like that there could be like that the truth is important, that the truth like has been so veiled, and there are a lot of young people that I spoke to from the organization or from the region who were like, I knew this stuff would happen, but I never knew more about it, and no one would talk to me about it. And so my hope was always that even though there had been a lot of like kind of shitty coverage of it, that hopefully just an accounting of like events and facts would serve a purpose, whether or not that's a healing purpose to some people or feels more difficult is valid and up for debate. But and then also other responses from people I don't know personally but who live in the area being like, this is really like well researched and like represents us in a way I feel comfortable with, and that's been like the biggest compliment. But yeah, there's been lots of things that are also like I think anytime you are that sort of like reactivation of trauma, like anytime you have been so like used to expecting being represented in a like shitty way, an uncareful way, I think people are certainly like on the lookout for that. And so there's been places where I'm sure I stumbled and people have been wanting to talk about it or point that out. And then other places where people are like, oh, I'm surprised. We got that right. Good job. And I was like, thank you.
There are a couple ex-boyfriends in this book.
There are, yes.
Who are portrayed in very nuanced ways, but that are not always positive.
Yes.
And I wondered if, if they had any strong negative reactions or asked you to remove anything, and are they going to sue you? Like,
I hope not. Yes, there was one ex-boyfriend who was not pleased. I think that we had a pretty nuanced conversation about it where, you know, I feel like he saw my ability and need to write these facts and acknowledge their truthfulness, and I understood that they would be like painful and difficult for him to read about, and we both kind of came to this place of like, well, I understand you need to do this, and he was like, yep, I was like, I understand you're not happy about it, and he was like, yep. Like, I felt like it was certainly an accounting of like our differences and mutual hurt, but also like mutual understanding to some extent. So yeah, but it was not pleasurable.
yeah. You know, I was thinking about one of the I learned a lot about West Virginia in this book,
Oh, very
because
good.
I haven't read a lot of books that take place there, and it's just I'm pretty ignorant of that region. But one of the points you make in the book that I thought was pretty interesting is that this is a place that when it was prosperous, it was because of outside businesses coming in and extracting the natural resources. First it was the trees.
Yep, big logging. This particular part of West Virginia is not coal country. It's logging was the big industry. Yeah.
And just I was just thinking about, you know, the act of writing about this place, and I have feelings about this too that are also ambivalent, you know, because
Yeah.
I've written about things that have actually happened, and
Yeah, I was gonna
you know,
say, yeah.
and I guess I wanted to ask, like, you know, like, to what extent do you think that writing is extractive, and like, and to what extent is it not? Like, you know, because I think that the definition of extractive that you give in the book, and I think that that's the factual accurate definition, is that you are taking without sowing seeds back in.
Yeah.
You know, you're removing resources without replacing them, so there's only so much
Yeah.
that that you can do with that before it's just a dead industry. And you know, and I wonder, and I wonder if writing feels like that, or if you think that there is something that you're putting back in the ground.
Yeah, that's it's well put, and I think too, I always think of when I think of like extraction in this particular community, that there's this actually, so Briary Knob, where the two women were killed, it's a reclaimed mine site now, not for coal but for fracking actually, and there's it's supposedly reclaimed because these companies have put these, like, they're basically like green plastic pellets. That's what's sprinkled over the top of the earth, supposedly like to reclaim it, to make it usable again. And it's such a joke. And I think that, I think in my worst moments, I was like, I'm sprinkling plastic pellets on this mountain. Like, that's what I'm doing. And in my best moments, I don't think that. I think that, to return to this idea of, like, we discover Appalachia and then we don't care. Again, one of those booms was the local color novel movement, which was a lot of writers from elsewhere right after the Civil War would, like, drive around through West Virginia and be like, America, like, we have lost all of our, like, local traditions, and, like, but look at this place that still has some, like, let's write novels about them. And they were mostly, like, romance or sort of, like, historical fiction. Like, the idea was to use a place as kind of the, literally the color, like the stuff that was, like, juicy, why readers would want to read it. And I think learning about that history, which really comes from Elizabeth Catt's book, What You're Getting Wrong About Appalachia, which I hope is here. It's really amazing. It's a really like compact and smart public history of the region, and she talks a lot about this very idea of, like, this was a true thing that happened. Like, all these writers literally from, like, New York or Baltimore would come in and then sell these novels. Like, they were sort of like the Twilights of, like, the the moment. Like, just, like, a shit ton of money was made, which is really fascinating. And I think that money is a part of it, you know, and without, like, going into too much detail, I'll gladly chat with folks after. Like, money has been a part of my process in terms of giving like targeted and intentional donations of money into places like the Stay Project, which is an amazing, really cool organization that works with young people in Appalachia to stay in the region, to support each other, to create opportunities to make the region sustainable to like live in and be in as a young person or a queer person. And also I think like I try to be very, again, with this idea of like writing alongside, like bringing attention and lifting up stories and voices of people that are doing this work from the inside. So definitely tried in each chapter is like sort of themed or named with, each section, there's 7, are named with a West Virginia writer who I think should be read more, except for one section, which is for James Baldwin, so sorry. But the other 6. And certainly like an additional list in the back of all of these texts that not even were just ones that I read, but are just ones that I think speak to these issues in better and more complete ways than I do. So I don't know. Am I a plastic pellet? Am I digging deeper? Both, probably both.
I mean, it's I feel like it's a perennial writer question that can be applied to a lot of genres.
Yeah.
And actually, one of those genres is just true crime, generally. Yeah. I think I saw that one of the people who blurbed your book is the author of Dead Girls.
Yeah.
Which
has some nice LA color, too.
Yeah, it's like a collection about that kind of deals with the role of dead girls and women in true crime, which is a genre that is heavily consumed by women. And so I also wanted to ask you about that component, writing about these dead women, because it's also the there are 2 women who are also very unconventional.
Yeah.
They're these independent hitchhikers who come to the end that like in a horror story that hitchhikers will sometimes come to. They're not conventionally attractive, which is a thread in the book, and the way that the men of Pocahontas County react to them, including the prime suspect, is something that kind of colored your opinion of the case. And so I guess I wanted to ask you about Nancy and Vicki, and how you approach writing about these women who have no voice because they were killed 4 years ago, just how you struck that balance of doing honor to them.
Yes. I like love and hate that like because like I got to spend a lot of time with the like primary documents around their deaths, and I tried to always use like verbatim quoted speech rather than just like my narrative voice in describing these women and their bodies, which felt important because I'm sort of more interested in like what is it like for a person in the events to look at a dead body than I am in what I think of looking at a sort of intellectual idea of a dead body. So the word that the coroner used to describe them was obese. They were both obese. And I'm interested in like fatness and the way that we talk about like fatness in women's bodies as well. And it was just like fascinating that was the word that was used. It probably speaks to like some 1980s idea of like what fat meant, but right, like that was in a lot of the coverage that was about these crimes. They were fat. Vicki had like a buck tooth, like prominent teeth. They were not like shaving their legs. So like there was a lot of like discussion of their intimate physical bodies in the coverage of these events that I was just like both grossed out by and also like very interested in, because I'm like those things, like I'm like a fat hairy lady, so like that speaks to me, and I liked that about them. I think that attracted me to the story and gave me a way into it in a way that I would not have been interested in talking about like a JonBenet Ramsey or like a tiny blonde lady, in the sense that like those are not the people that are mostly killed, like the sort of ideal looking people, and those are not the people that I tend to be most interested in. Of course, they are like white girls, which is certainly part of the trope, and I think it was always like a compromise in many ways that flooded through the whole book of like there's these like concerns or ambivalences or things I want to challenge, and then there are also the facts of these particular events. So the fact is, like, 2 women were found, they were white women, and I had to figure out like how to sort of challenge and push against that trope at the same time that it was a true thing. And so there was always like that both and tendency of like how to represent them, how to push against like the reader's fascination with their bodies. So I did try to like, definitely use like as much in the period of information and documents as were available. And also like, as I was trying to say in the beginning, like show that there's a multitude of reasons why people would travel or leave home. Some of them have to do with desperation and urgency. Some of them have to do with just like what's out there. I want to go on an adventure. And I think for these people, it was like some of both. But yeah, there were some really painful moments. Like the main suspect of the crime like looks at pictures of them and is like, I couldn't have killed them because they were fat, basically, which like assumes this connection between like killing and sexual violence, which is not there in this case. Like there's no evidence of sexual assault in this case, and there's no evidence that like sex or sexuality played a role in their deaths, but that's kind of like always assumed, which I was trying to break down as well. Like that's not really the motive here, but it's like sort of always what we think.
Yeah, no, that was particularly tough to swallow.
Indeed. But yeah, how do you navigate that in your fiction too? Like thinking about writing about death, like how do you handle pushing back against those tropes?
Yeah, I try to be respectful. I think that's the main thing, is to try to do honor to, especially if I'm writing about something real, which like my book is based on a murder that happened in 1991, and and especially kind of fictionalizing it, I wanted to make sure that I didn't erase it from history, and I kind of did honor to the legacy of that particular LA history. And so, it's kind of a hard balance, It's something that I thought about a lot as I was writing the book. I think there's a real responsibility that comes in to engaging with these stories that are still like carried in the minds of people who lived through them.
Yeah. For
I'm
sure.
going to ask one. I have a bunch of questions actually, but I'm going to ask one more before opening it up. And if nobody else has questions, I can ask more. But the title, The Third Rainbow Girl, because the Nancy and Vicki never got to go on their adventures. They never even made it to the Rainbow Gathering.
Yeah.
And then there's this third woman who she isn't actually in a lot of the book.
Yeah.
But you say early on that this book, she's kind of the heart of the book in a way. And, obviously you titled it after her, and you met her, and she kind of comes in at the end of the story. And she is somebody who is still alive and was able to go on these adventures because she made this decision to split paths with them. And so I want to ask you about her and the title and why she has this central place to you in this story.
Yeah, I think it's like very unusual. Normally I switch titles like 50,000 times but this book only ever had this title. I think Liz Jandra, who again is this woman who hitchhikes with her friends, they go to this gathering and die, and she goes in a different direction and lives a very like full and strange and open life. She still sort of like lives out of her van to some extent in Vermont. She opened up more to the universe instead of closing down after these friends of hers were killed, which I found fascinating. So I think once I learned of her existence, she was like probably the first real person that I reached out to for an interview. So she always in some ways was the like gateway into this story for me, in the sense of which I think speaks to like other threads in the book, so hopefully the title ends up expanding to include other people, because what Liz said to me like in this very first interview was I wasn't harmed by these events, but I was traumatized, in the sense that I was not literally there, but like its effects were still felt like in me and my life and my body for a long time. And she talked about this very profound experience of survivor's guilt, of carrying this like idea that she had escaped this fate in some way, and also that a broader sense of like that there was like violence out there that had not reached her. And I think then the more I talked to people in the county, the more it seemed to me that there were actually a lot of different third rainbow girls, including these like 9 guys who were arrested or accused. Some of them served periods of time in jail between like 2 months and 2 years. The central guy who was convicted served 9 years. Many of the guys who served shorter periods of time just sat in the county jail due to like the cash bail system, essentially, that we're seeing now more so than ever in places like Philadelphia, where I live, Baltimore, Chicago, New York. Like this idea essentially of you can get locked up on the basis of a single statement, and then if you don't have money, you sit there until they let you go. And so many of these men involved in this case were incarcerated for no reason, basically, and also then had family members that felt the effects of that, children that grew up in the shadow of knowing their dad had been accused of that, or cousin or brother or whatever, and that there were lots of people that were not directly there in that moment, but were certainly carrying like the trauma of it. So that became kind of like the central understanding I had of this case, which was like all of the ways that people may not have been at the heart of the violence, but were certainly like their lives were like rewired by it too. Yeah.
Do people have questions? I just don't want to hog.
Tough. Yeah, hi. Is there a transcript on the trial? Is there one? For your research? Oh, okay. Yes. So, fun story, which is that trial transcripts are extremely difficult to get a hold of. We can talk more of the nerdy details, but essentially trial transcripts belong to court reporters, people that take them down in court. They're technically their intellectual property, which is crazy to me. So they cost a great deal of money to obtain. So I could never I actually did go and sit in the county clerk office in the area where this crime happened and took like individual photos of like 3,000 pages of trial transcript. That took a long time, which was probably not the most efficient way to go about it. But you can't take them out of the office if you can't buy them, and they cost between $1 and $3 a page. So for like 2,000 pages, 3,000 pages, it was out of my reach. But then once I did sell the book, I decided that it was the right thing to do to buy the transcript, like to pay, because court reporters it's a really cool and amazing, interesting, like middle-class job, especially for women in rural areas. It's one of the first like well-paying middle-class jobs that women have access to in a lot of these areas. So, and the money from transcript purchases actually like is viewed as part of their salary. It's sort of like when you pay like a server $2 and then and then you tip them, that makes a livable wage. The same is true for trial transcripts. So I was like, okay, I want to buy this from you, and that also made the fact checker's life a lot easier. So, cool. Yeah, it's complicated though, and I wanted to quote like a gazillion pages of the trial transcript. I was telling people earlier, but my editor was like, dial it back, because I'm always again really interested in what was actually said. But we did come to a compromise of like weaving it in. I'll speak, summarize, the transcript will come in. And I also did get to watch the tapes of the trial. There were, it was the first gavel-to-gavel fully televised trial in the state of West Virginia, which is interesting because it also coincides with like the dawn of the 24-hour like news cycle where people could watch real like courtroom drama going on, which then sort of like spawns all we've come to see with like Law and Order and CSI. Like all of that sort of began in the early 80s. So it was a long answer, but yes, there was one, and yes, it's really interesting.
So with non-normative gender appearance, you're policed in your gender, and so there's non-normative women.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any implied blaming of the victim because of that? And what I'm really interested in this story because of Alice Baldwin's work.
Oh, yeah.
How were the men informed? How were the men defined? Because I assume that was and I think that's why and you guys check me if I'm wrong with this, but a lot of women are just writing about this right now. We haven't really come to conclusions on it, but I mean, we're nailed to these stories not because of these Princess Di figures, these dead women that we're worshiping. It's because we're learning about men through them, aren't we? In the anxiety of this culture, how vulnerable we really are because how lost men are. Isn't that what we're learning?
Yeah, very interesting. Yes, I think that there was a lot of implicit blaming of Vicki and Nancy, these two women who died mostly because they were hitchhiking. A lot of the blame came from that, like, well, if you go out the door as a hitchhiker, like, what do you expect, kind of. And again, this writer, Vanessa Vaselka, who I love a lot, says that, that's, like, the story that if a woman goes out the door as a hitchhiker, she's essentially already dead, is a really harmful, just as a story, that if we could actually change that story and talk about all the reasons why women and queer people and trans people travel alone and for whatever reason, then that would actually affect, like, real world ability of, like, lots of different bodies to travel in the world, which I think is an interesting idea, that, like, stories and real outcomes have, like, a sort of feedback loop with each other, the power of story, right? But yeah, I think what you're referring to, again, this book, Alice Boland, Dead Girls, it's an essay collection, talks a lot about, right, that in something like yeah, like even like a Law and Order SVU, like so much of, we're not actually interested in like the lives of women, we're interested in the lives of men, which is like the Dead Girl's just like a vehicle to look at men. And I think, aware of that as a potential like pitfall in this story, but I'm also like legitimately am very interested in masculinity and am interested in Appalachian masculinity in this case, because so much of like the story that was told about these murders was like, we don't know, like bad Appalachian hick dudes like did this for no reason. That was like the original story. And so part of my interest was sort of in like deconstructing that idea. But then I think, like, as is hopefully clear, like my heart and empathy always like lay with Vicki and Nancy to some extent, although I also have a lot of empathy and interest in these guys too. So that's kind of the both end of the book, is like women are suffering, men are suffering, everyone's suffering. Neither of those sufferings like negates or cancels out the other, right? It's complicated.
Did you ever feel in your research you found out who felt bad? I know that's not.
No, fair. I form an opinion, which I feel fairly clear about in the book, which is that I don't think it was a local guy.
I think, and I mean, I guess that's one of the few spoilers. But I mean,
yeah.
but yeah, I agree. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like,
Oh no.
sorry, but there were these competing stories, and I do think it's interesting that this, because the part that you read about, how we latch onto these stories, that makes sense. I think it's telling that the story of these 7 men who like were all kind of involved in some way, that sold as a story.
Yeah, for sure.
Because once you kind of examine it, it like doesn't make sense. Nobody's individual stories actually match up. The main suspect, I mean, one of the things that they found so suspicious about him is because he told this story that obviously didn't happen, about like the third rainbow girl who was like who was like chopped up in a wood chipper, and it's
which
just,
is like a crazy violent, like right out of a like
it's a Fargo
bad horror movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's literally like Fargo. Exactly. Yeah, I love that. Yes, right. And that, but that was believable. He knew that would be believable to some extent, and like he had imagined that story. I find that fascinating.
But both the outsiders and the insiders really bought into this, and I do want to leave time for other questions, but like I was actually curious too about, like, because you talked to the detective in this case, although he seemed pretty defensive, but it seems like you spent a lot of time with the prosecutor.
I did.
And these are men who absolutely believe that they had the right guy, and one of them said the reason that he believes it is because he made these like menacing phone calls. Yes. In the very beginning, that's how he got onto the detective's radar. And they never got off of that story.
It's true, and I think our folks, did anyone listen to Dolly Parton's America in here? Mm-hmm. So fun, right? Yes, great. And I feel that, I bring that up, which is just to say that, as you said, like, insiders and outsiders both believed this very, like, basic, strange, sort of stereotyped story. And I think what that show does really well, there's, like, an episode about Appalachian accents, right, and the ways that we still want to eradicate an Appalachian accent in many ways, and that many young people growing up in Central Appalachia are like so shamed for the way they speak and like literally their language. And the director of the nonprofit that's in here, Mountain Views, she like went to Harvard and ended up dropping out because there was just like so much disdain for her language and the way she spoke. And I think that it's impossible to grow up and live in a place for which, like, broader America has such disgust and disdain, which is Central Appalachia to a great extent, without absorbing a lot of that, like, shame and those attitudes, like, in a similar way to talking about, like, internalized misogyny or internalized racism. Like, I think there is internalized anti-West Virginia-ness and internalized anti-Appalachian-ness. And I think there was a great sense in the investigators who are local to a degree, the prosecutors from Pocahontas County, the detective is from broader West Virginia, but that I think there was a great sense of, like, we are bad, like, something bad happened here, and we have to, like, root that out and make it better.
And they decided immediately that the person had to be local.
Yes.
I mean, that's so fascinating. Like,
It would have been so much easier to be like, someone else did it from somewhere else, but they
Yeah.
were like, no, it was one of us, and we are going to fix it. Yeah.
That was one of the first, like, kind of, fixed points of their narrative, and
Yeah.
it never really changed. And you know, the guy that you think did it, and that, I mean, I think there's the strongest case for his having done it is a serial killer who was there at the time.
Yes, many people will disagree, and I don't know that we'll, like, ever know, which is another part of like, what this book taught me, I feel like, which is just, like, sometimes we just, like, we'll never know, and, like, that's an okay place to end, even though it doesn't feel good. Yeah.
No, and there are people who very strongly believe in narratives, like, that they remember that can't possibly coexist in the real world, and I think that's pretty fascinating.
Yes, Marty.
A project that I worked on, and I did a lot of research, 5 different people who were there at the same event all told completely different versions
Totally.
of what happened. How did you deal with that as a writer? How do you face that when you start putting it together?
It was really hard because, like, again, as we know, like, human beings process stories in, like, a simple way, and we want it, especially to, like, be readable. Like, it's a book that, you know, starts on page 1 and ends on page whatever, 315. So, like, that ultimately we have to manage all that, like, complexity and contradiction, but still, like, bring a reader along for that ride, which is really hard. I think my solution was to essentially tell all of them, but from tell a through line, back up, tell it again, back up, tell it again, back up, tell it again, and, like, just be like, there is, even if there cannot be, like, factual truth in some of the stories that were told, I think every story is important for its, like, emotional truth, or, like, what it's trying to convey. Like, you know, I think in this case of, like, this one guy confessed to the murders, there's no way, like, there's no evidence that he was there or even did it, like, but I think he was trying to convey something of, like, I feel like I have done wrong in some way, in some other sense, to some other woman in my life, like, who's to say? But, like, that emotional truth is also important, so I tried to, like, hold those all in the book, even if, even as I do try to acknowledge that I think some of them happened in the world of, like, where you and I live, and some of them happened in the world of someone else's heart and brain. Yeah, but it's tough. Yeah, Jen.
Question, even the serial killer you treat with so much empathy, was there anybody that you encountered that's in the book that you're like, my empathy is failing me? You know what I mean?
None for you. Yeah. Thanks. Yes, I think it's really interesting. This guy who did, he committed this long string of horrible, senseless crimes in the late 1970s, mostly against men of color and white women and interracial couples. And he has a very, like, clear, basically what I learned about him was, like, he was like, I was so mentally ill. Like, he was medicated at the end of his life, and he was like, I was so ill, and I was so angry. And this was, like, I wish I could undo, like,
Yeah, like, tons of brain damage.
so much damage, so much, like, right, like, of course.
From, like, a childhood of severe abuse.
Extreme, right, like, we understand that, like, people are not made in a vacuum. So I think I had a lot of empathy for him. I feel both very empathetic and very confused still by Jacob Beard, who is the guy who was convicted of these crimes. Like, I feel empathetic towards him in the sense that I do not think he's a murderer. I also kind of think he's a bit of an asshole,
Yeah,
you know?
he just like sucks.
Yeah, he just like kind of sucks. And I feel like there's like this whole narrative of like if someone is wrongfully convicted, like they are this like amazing like martyr, and like we read these stories that are super important, like Khalif Browder, who was like essentially held for no reason, like quote unquote for stealing a backpack, and like he is this like smart, interesting, articulate young man, and like he's a very good figure for like this movement of wrongful incarceration and youth incarceration. And like, what do you do when you have like a figure who's like I don't think he's a murderer, but he's just like not a nice guy. And so I tried to make that clear, but I think it's clear that I don't like him either. And yeah, I was never really able to find a way into his stuff because he wasn't very honest with me, I didn't feel, in his interview. Like he was just kind of like, see my side, like love me, believe me. And I was like, I don't love you, And that, I think because I wasn't able to like be with him in his brain, he wasn't open to that. Understandably in some ways, because there's been so much coverage of this case being like, you're bad, you're a murderer. Like, sure, I probably would be defensive too, but I felt he was fairly, he just lived in this other plane of like, I'm perfect and everyone has been accusing me of these crimes and I don't know why. And I was kind of like, well, I do, like if he could have acknowledged some of that, I think I would have had more empathy for him. So that was hard. And I don't know that, like, I'm pretty honest about that I don't like him, but also I don't think he killed them, which is a weird thing to live with. Yeah. Yes.
Do you have a particular favorite character that you worked with? And in that favorite character, was there like a moment of discovery that changed your going in and how you potentially write about them?
Tough. It's like they're people and they're characters and they're people, right? Like they're real. I think Vicki Durian, I started off like being more interested in Nancy Santomero, who's from Long Island and is kind of like outdoorsy. She wanted to be a park ranger. I was like, that's cool. I'm into her. And then I was like very gracious that Vicki Durian, this other woman who died, who's from Iowa, her family let me sort of come and hang out with them for a while, which was unexpected. I wasn't sure how much they would want to participate. And they told me this really difficult and fascinating story about how she had this child that she had given up for adoption at this time when forced adoption was really common. Like Joni Mitchell wrote this like memoir about reuniting with her daughter right at about this period of forced adoption, and the ways that like before there was abortion, like it was really, you had no choice. And that Vicki had this child, and that really changed my understanding of her, I think, and like her journey and why she would want to go on this adventure, which was like great and exciting for her and also risky, as we know. And just that, she had a lot of like pain and unhealed stuff from that was helpful in understanding like what she was doing, what she was looking for. So yeah, and that came from a real personal disclosure from her real family. And I think that's like what's so fun and magical about reporting when it works is like there's all this stuff that you don't know, and then someone will tell you something and it like completely changes your idea of who people are. Reporting is like magical in that way, hopefully. Yes.
One of the things in your book that really I liked a lot was that the book is a lot about you and your own.
Unfortunately, yes.
And there's a moment in the book where I kind of had this sense like I was worried about you.
Oh.
And that like
Yeah.
you were immersed in this community and you were kind of ambivalent as to whether you could stay or go.
Mm-hmm.
I was curious just about your own development during the process of writing the book.
Yeah, there was someone actually who came to my New York event, which you were at also, lovely Billy, who was like, worked in criminal justice as a defense attorney, and she asked me about my like self-care, like in writing this book, like how do you deal with difficult material? And I was like, how do you deal with difficult material? Like I think everyone who works in and around, even who does research or, fiction is also in this category of like when you're working with this kind of like really heavy material, it's very, I did dream about murder like every night for like 3 years. That is true. And I think that I didn't always know like what to do with that feeling of like, this feels hard to write about. Like, is that okay that it feels hard? I think that I definitely felt a lot of ambivalence of like, it feels hard to write about it, but like it feels harder to live it. You know, that question of like, do I get to feel bad about this? Do I get to feel traumatized? Does my story matter? And then I think like writing that beginning part, which is just called like True Things, just a list that starts the book. I was thinking about it and I was like, well, all of these things happened to other people that are important and difficult and traumatizing. And like another true thing is like that I also was there and also things happened to me. And that's like another true thing on the list. And that gave me the opportunity, I think, to feel like even though they weren't all on the same weight, they were all true and happened. So yeah, it was. Yeah, it is. There is a good amount of that processing in there.
Well, I think that's the time we have.
Yeah.
But Emma will be signing books that are available for purchase over there. Thank you all for coming. This was a
Thank you
pleasure.
so much for being in conversation. Such a good chat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me. Oh, no.
Thank you, Emma. I hope you enjoyed your stay in Los Angeles.
Oh my God, still in process. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you, Steph, for coming. I know you're not well, so she's going to scooch on out of here as soon as the event is
Yay. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But we do have signed copies of Steph's book available if you'd like to get a copy up there. We obviously have copies of Emma's books. Please
Just the one.
copy of it if you bought the book first before you got them signed. I'll move all this stuff out of the way, bring out a table where she can sign these.
Ooh.
Also, if you're a member of the store, you always get priority in the sign line. Just know that. So just
Ooh.
identify yourself.
That's a good fun perk. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So just identify yourself and you get to have your book signed first. But please line up against games, sports, mythology. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Can you sign my book?
You've been listening to the Skylight Books author reading series. Don't forget, you can listen to this and all of our other great podcasts at skylightbooks.com. Thanks again for stopping by, and we hope to see you soon.